Hey everyone, Phreak here. 8.24b has come out, and by the time you watch this video, it's been out for at least like 18 hours, so a bit late to the show here with this one, but I wanted to cover it anyway. 8.24b is a fairly small patch. Not even tooltips for a lot of things will get updated, but functionality will change. Also, because it's not a real patch and it's the off season, it's my time to change my facial hair in case there's other things that can work. So let me know how this looks. Otherwise, it's going to do it. 8.24b. Nexus Blitz has a big update. There's a patch note thing right here. I recommend checking it out. Otherwise, let's move on. So Akali has definitely been a frustrating champion. Akali is not successful for most of her games, whether it's because she's underpowered or simply requires a lot of skill to be good at. Well, Akali, yeah, I mean, she does require a lot of skill to be good at. She's not someone you can mash your face in the keyboard and get good results with, but people are still clearly trying to play her and still clearly banning her. She's very frustrating, and so they are trying to reduce frustration on the character, which is a noble goal. And so instead of lowering the amount of time that, the amount of time that she was stealthed in 8.24b, they're instead changing the re-stealth functionality. So on the one hand, she's generally going to be re-stealthing slower, which is a positive. On the other hand, she's also going to sort of reveal her location and then go into true stealth, which I believe is just an extra sort of bit here where she gets to give you more information before turning invisible, and things that might potentially go through are more likely to go through against her. So those are all cool. The other thing I want to bring up is this re-stealth timing is changing from level-based to game time-based. And I think this is a good thing. I think Akali is definitely more snowball-y than needed. And if you say game time changes it more than character level changes it, it means that Akalis who are doing well will get their re-stealth timers later, and Akalis who are doing poorly will get their re-stealth timers sooner, which I'm going to consider a positive for the game. You might not agree, but that's how I feel. Anyway, I did some numbers, and I assumed, by the way, that this sort of level 1, 6, 9, 12 was going to be the same as minutes 1, 8, 11, 20. That's not quite accurate. Level 6 is about 6 minutes in. So it's not completely one-to-one. So this is actually more of a nerf than it looks like in this chart. But if we assume those timers just sort of meet each other, then yeah, in the late game from like 30 minutes onwards, she has the same stealth timer. But otherwise, in pretty much all cases, she's going to re-stealth slower. So you have more time to hit her. Plus, things that you had started in the middle of the cast will go through. And overall, that should be a positive. I expect this to help with the Akali frustration a fair bit. Now, I still think turrets should give a full reveal of the champion. That is how I feel about the design of the character. But this will at least help, and that's a good thing. I do want to point out that another example of a champion that certainly T had done that seemed to have too many mechanics that ended up in a good spot was Thresh. Thresh is a fairly well-beloved champion where the bonus damage and auto attack was moved to the hook to flay. Box no longer deals damage beyond the first target. The lantern's no longer an AoE shield. Enough things were pulled off the kit that Thresh still got to feel like Thresh in basically all cases and stopped being overpowered. So I do have hope that kits like this can completely line up in the right spot, and that extra mechanics are there because they can help shape how the character works. Anyway, I think this will help with Akali frustration. We'll see how it goes. Next up is Pike. Pike definitely ended up being far too good in the mid lane after the lethality buffs to his scaling, so a really big deal there. And so they're trying to do some targeted nerfs towards mid lane. Well, stat growth is of course more of a solo lane stat than a support stat, so that's going to disproportionately nerf mid lane, and it's MR growth, and mid lane has magic damage dealers typically, so that's a good touch. Bone Skewer's AoE is going to get worse. That's, of course, a straight-up mid-lane nerf as well. And then the damage on the R is going down from levels 10 and onwards. And level 10 and onwards is something that mid-laners get more than supports get. But I wanted to point something out with this damage chart. So here's his magic durability with the MR scaling going down from 2 to 1.5. I want to point out, by the way, that Pike still has above average MR scaling. A typical melee has 1.25 MR per level. He has 1.5. Normally you end at 53. He ends at 58. Doesn't have to mean anything. Just means he's still a champion with abnormal stats. That can be okay. But there's this sort of chart right here. Cool. Next up is the ultimate damage. And of course, again, levels 6, 7, 8, and 9 is the same damage, then 10 onwards it's worse. And it's worse by a fair bit, 2 to eventually 9%. That's a pretty big hit. Now, what I want to point out, though, is, again, in 8.22, I believe it was, he got lethality scaling on the ultimate to make Tank Pike less good. And so I'm graphing this lethality buff on the ult against the damage cut on the ultimate. And, well, the math works out as generally still a positive. That ultimately, lethality Pike is going to be doing more damage than he was back in the day. Tank Pike is doing even worse than before. I think this is fine. This seems reasonable, and he definitely needed fairly big nerfs to cope with how strong he was mid-game, or mid-lane. These nerfs are all individually fairly small, but at the end of the day, this is probably a fairly big hit to Pike. I think he'll still be strong as a mid laner, but should be reasonable. Next up is a stage of simple buffs. Caitlyn is gaining 20 damage on her Q, but 7% off the pass-through damage. Here is this chart right here. The Q is better up until rank 3, and then is worse as far as the pass-through damage. It is, of course, always better on the main target. Duh. Cool. You, by the way, always get main target damage on someone who's been hit by a trap, and I believe by your E as well, even if you are hitting through minions to hit them, so okay, seems positive. Ultimately, though, Caitlyn's wave clear is definitively worse now, which I don't know if that was an intended change or not, but definitely worse overall wave clear, such as it is. As far as the ult range, that's a pretty big deal here. Fairly substantial jump in range. This seems pretty sweet. I definitely don't think Caitlyn R needs more damage early game, but getting more usability seems great. And in general, this is something that I'll probably make a video on in the next couple of days before I head out for the holiday break and everything. I want to see marksman become more caster-based. Just a little bit. Not a ton. I don't want Caitlyn to become Ahri suddenly. But I think a good way to balance out the power curves of champions like Caitlyn and Kaisa, etc., is to push more of their power budget into their abilities. This is one way of doing that. Making the Q and R better allows her to do things that are not simply auto-attacking. If Caitlyn is a balanced champion with an R and a Q this good, she is less reliant on auto-attacking every champion to death. That is a positive change in my opinion. It can go too far. I don't think we're there yet. Next up is buffs to Corki. Corki is more of a sort of a mage anyway, but a flat 15 extra damage on the ult and a flat 30 for the big ones because, of course, yes, it's still double damage. Here's that 20 to 12% more base damage. Keep in mind that the higher ranks have exceptionally high attack damage ratios. The AD ratio scales very high with rank, so it means a lot at 6, a bit less at 11, and a lot less at 16 because the AD ratio is going to start covering this. But Corki was overall not doing too well. Caitlyn was a 48.5% win rate champion, and Caitlyn's pretty easy to play, so that means she's definitely weak. That said, Caitlyn has been an oppressive bot laner at 48% before. So I don't think Caitlyn needs to be that much stronger. Again, I am glad her buffs are things that aren't her lane bullying and her turret smashing. Her actual wave clear is down, which is probably a good thing. This feels like a solid reshape on Caitlyn. Corki is a 47% to 48% mid lane win rate. Brain's not working. So this seems pretty positive. This is a pretty reasonable buff. This should help him to the tune of 1% or so. Next up is Singed. Singed got absolutely wrecked in 8.23. There were lots of changes to runes and whatnot, and he got hit very hard. He got ultimately hit very, very hard, and he's sitting at 47.5% win rate. And Singed is typically a champion played by mains and gets to hold a pretty high level of expertise and a very high win rate as a result, because Singed is actually pretty hard to play. Definitely needs buffs. And I want to say, first of all, that I love that his base health is going up. Now, what's interesting is I have two thoughts. So one, I like when base stats are consistent. And Singed is now, I believe, the only champion in the game, maybe there's one other, to have more than 600 health at level 1. 600 was almost always the upper bound. I might be slightly wrong about that. Maybe there's a couple champions, but there's at most 5. But I actually think it is better to have sort of bigger base stat differentiation. Singed is a melee champion and a tanky one at that, compared to say Master Yi or Akali, who are going to be frail. Or should be frail, I feel like. And Singed, having a whopping 600 something health at level 1, scaling to over 2,000, helps that even if he's not doing well and buying a lot of items, the health bar itself shows you, hey, I'm tanky. The fact that champions like Twitch and Jinx have like 580 something health at level 1, their health bar is as large as Singed's health bar, I don't like that. I would prefer if their health bars were a bit lower and stood at, 550 or 525 or something, and had, appropriate armor and MR values to match that. I would really like if base stats differentiated the baseline durability of champions. It doesn't do that very well, and I wish that did a better thing. That's something I can spend time on with a video again somewhere else as well. Let's get through the rest of the video. Fling, of course, doing a lot more damage in the early game. Keep in mind, Fling also has a base damage, not just the percent health damage on it. So let's talk about how much damage this is doing. Here's Singe's HP. Scales from 610 to now 2055, or 2025. And again, Singe being a melee sort of bruiser, tank, whatever, I think could honestly have base stats that scaled to like 2200 or something. Considering that a lot of marksmen scale to 1900, 300 apart is not very much, and I would like to see bigger differences there. I would like to see bigger differences in base stats over time. Again, down the line, I'll talk about that more. Here's Singe's Fling damage. Keep in mind that, again, it has a base damage on it. And I chose Old Singed, so this health pool right here, 580 to 2025, as the example target seemed reasonable. And so this is how much damage Fling is gaining. Fling is gaining 60% at level 1, a solid 22% in the mid game when the percent health damage is carrying it completely, and then before the rank ups start coming in. So this is definitely a pretty big buff that mostly helps from levels 1 through, let's say, sort of 9. And then as the last few ranks come in, it's not as big of a deal anymore. But definitely a very big buff to his laning phase. As with a 30 health, this is a very, very large buff to his laning phase. He should gain several percent win rate off this. Next up, buffs to Tristana. And again, I am happy with the kinds of buffs Tristana is getting. A flat 10 damage on explosive charge and a 0 to 0.2 bonus attack damage ratio on the charge as well. And keep in mind, of course, his damage goes up to 2.2x roughly. 2.2x if you can full charge the explosive. So here is this damage here. And I chose to say, yes, it's with 4 hits. The base damage starts at 17% higher, ends at 10% higher because that's math. The attack damage ratio starts at the same and eventually scales to 18% higher. So this is a pretty sizable buff. This is going to end up being 15%-ish more damage out of the E, which is a pretty substantial buff to the ability, and I think that's great. It's absolutely wonderful that Tristana is gaining more of her power in her spells so that less of the character is about simply AFK auto-attacking, disconnecting, and still getting a pentakill. I like the changes and the kinds of changes that are coming in. This is cool. The one thing I am slightly remiss about is that this is a power spike at level 9, and it's a power spike at first item with something like Storm Razor, and the ability doesn't scale as you build Static Shiv or Rapid Fire Cannon or whatever else, and so you still have this sort of mid-game trough that I think would be really nice these champions could actually get through with their abilities. Again, I can talk about that more later. There's a bunch of stuff I want to talk about with sort of AD carry shaping that I think could be a positive for the game. Maybe I'm wrong, but at another time. Next up is Varus. So I want to bring up, by the way, that Tristana wasn't doing very well. 47.5% win rate, roughly. The win rate has been stable. She's been staying at 47 and change for a while, but her pick rate and ban rate have been going down and down and down, down to the right. People are less and less and less playing Tristana, which, take that as you will, that's what's happening. So, next up is Varus, and Varus is doing really, really badly. 45% win rate. That is a big oof. He is doing abysmally down there. He's getting absolutely slaughtered, and so very big buffs. And so they're basically bumping the W uncharged to fully charged active damage. And this, I'm pretty certain, is the, W empowered Q damage, which is the same at low levels, but does go up from levels 4 and onwards. Now, not up by a ton, but does go up a little bit. And so here is the damage before and after, and I'm not choosing to include Q's damage in it just by itself. Just the simply hitting W and having that be an empowered shot, it does a fair bit more damage, up to 40% more at the max rank, at max level, at 13 and onwards, which is not that hard to reach. This is pretty solid. And of course, no matter what your build is, you're going to be able to access this. Now, if you are maxing Q, your Q cooldown is shorter, but W's cooldown is like 40 seconds or more anyway, so it's not like your Q cooldown is really what's holding you back. Either way, this seems like a positive. He's going to get some more poke damage, and again, it is ability-based damage. on this champion, which means Varus gets to rely on doing poke. And by the way, I do love that W is missing health damage. So it's not just like get them off the turret poke, it's assassination poke, or at least assassination snipe, which feels more fair, really. It's not really poke at that point. Missing health damage really can't be poke. It's a finisher. So this seems positive. Again, I don't think it's going to be nearly enough to buff Varus enough. Pretty much all of his first item builds are sub 50 win rate, so Varus is struggling in a lot of cases. Seemed like the Rage Blade change hurt him quite a bit. Definitely needs a lot of power. W plus R is probably not enough power up, but Varus is another champion like Caitlyn that can sit sub 50 and feel oppressive. So this could maybe be okay. Here's the R damage. Pretty simple stuff. Cool. Damage is up. This should be yellow. Doesn't really matter. 50 damage, 25 damage, 0 damage. This is solid, extra caster damage. This is pretty positive. 2 damage on Warwick. Great. Next up, enchanters are getting stronger, and this seems like a interesting choice. Now, of course, we don't want to go back to Ardent Censer meta. That was probably the worst possible meta. That versus lane swaps is debatable which one is worse. I'm not sure. Either way, you don't want to go back to Ardent Censer meta, but it is seemingly a good thing to say, hey, well, if enchanters can keep AD carries alive, can keep crit marksman alive, keep scaling marksman alive, maybe crit marksman can be good, right? If Nami is simply more powerful, who would you rather play with Nami? Brand or Vayne? It's probably Vayne. So these items being better is a straight buff to Nami, is a straight buff to Janna, is a straight buff to Soraka. And that means that champions who are good alongside those characters are going to be happier and are going to be more powerful and are going to get through the laning phases better. This generally seems like it will help crit marksmen, scaling marksmen who need safer laning phases. So this seems like it's going to help that a little bit. And these buffs don't seem overboard. I think enchanter supports should be happy about these changes. That's pretty cool. And great, healed and shield power up by 2 and 5 and 2. Okay, that's nice. Next up, nerfs to some of the more oppressive champions. Now, I actually don't think Alistar needed these nerfs, by the way. So Alistar's win rate is not super high anymore. It's actually sub 50%. And his pick and ban rate have both been steadily falling over the last 3 patches. Now, Alistar was a really big deal at Worlds. Absolutely. And they said, okay, well, now that we're done with this one, Alistar's pick rate seems to be fairly high. He's doing really well in high elo. Maybe they nerf Alistar. But Alistar was going down in priority. I think this nerf didn't need to happen. This, I think, will completely slaughter Alistar. Now, the nerfs aren't even that big. It's just that Alistar was already on his way out from a player perception perspective, and this is the nail in the coffin. Now, Alistar is another champion that could probably sit sub 50 comfortably because his moments of strength are so high. He will probably always be satisfying. And Trample is not really a big satisfaction hit, so it's not going to feel that insane. But I just don't think it needed to happen because he was already on his way out from a perception perspective. But here's how much damage Trample did before and after if you landed all 5 shockwaves plus the basic attack, not counting his total AD. It was just what Trample is giving. And it's still 100 damage on that ability. It's still very, very high for a rank 1 ability. And in fact, because you rank it up for reals at level 3, it's 140 damage for a rank 1 ability, which is quite high. But anyway, here's the damage cut. Right, the percentage, of course, is bigger in the early game, less as time goes on. But it's certainly going to be harder to finish an all-in as Alistar. And hey, with these, buffs to all these items and Alistar being less good at all-inning to the tune of 20 plus 20 more damage, maybe Alistar just falls off a cliff. Maybe this is big enough that you just don't play him anymore because he cannot kill Nami. Might be the case. Next up, Cassiopeia definitely arose quite a lot. People figured out Q max into W max and playing full kiting was the new best build. You ran Comet, you got a Leandries. It was freaking impossible to deal with this champion. W had a really long range and a really big AoE. You got something out of them all the time. So good to see that the Q got nerfed because it was Q max into W max. Q nerf, coming in at the beginning maybe means that you go for the other stuff. What's nice though is it doesn't really nerf the E max builds because rank 1 has the same cost and does the same damage. And rank 2 costs 5 more mana and does 5 less damage. So it's not a very big deal at level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It doesn't really mean much at 8 and 9. Maybe it starts to matter at level 10 if you're playing Emax, but with Qmax, it's going to be a big hit. And here is the damage and the cost drop on Cassio Q. Fairly big deal. Fairly big deal. This is going to be a sizable hit. I think QW Max is still going to be the superior build on Cassiopeia and will still be exceptionally strong, but it's good that it's going down some. That seems positive. Really was doing very, very well. Her pick rate went from 2 to 14% since the middle of 8.23. And her win rate is over 53% as well. So like really, really gained a lot. Her pick rate septupled over a patch and a half. She picked up a lot. Next up is Kassadin. Kassadin is also a bit too strong. He's sitting at about 52% win rate. Like Alistar, though, his pick and ban rate have been slowly falling. I think it's fine that Kassadin, sits closer to 50. I think this is another scary champion. That he sits over 50 can be really, really scary because Kassadin can absolutely take over games. By comparison, earlier on we had Warwick sitting at 52 and got buffs. Warwick seems to be a champion that can sit above 50 and it feels okay for everyone. Warwick feels reasonably fair. I know there's going to be some junglers in the comments who are like, Warwick is insane and he smashes me in the jungle. And it's like, yes, Warwick is absolutely strong. But of the champions who are strong, Warwick is one of the more acceptable, it seems. It seems. You don't have to agree, but it's what it seems to be true. So Kassadin nerf seems reasonable. 2 off the base health regen. Here is that data table. I like to show health regen as a per minute because those kind of get it into numbers that people can, I think, really kind of grok on a meaningful level. And it's a pretty sizable health regen nerf. Yeah, of course, you're going to go Corrupting Potion or Redoran Shield and eventually get a Catalyst. And so you've got other sources of regen that this change doesn't matter in the mid game really at all. But in the early game, in the laning phase, it matters quite a bit. You're getting 14 less health per minute. Or 12, it should be 24. 20, there we go. 24 less health per minute. It's pretty sizable. If you don't recall at all until 6, that's about 4 minutes in lane. That's 100 something. That's about 100 health that he won't have after across his first recall. It's pretty sizable. Next up, nerfs to Neeko, and Neeko doesn't seem to be too insane. In Platinum plus solo queue, she's just sitting at about 50% win rate. She is the only champion in the history of League of Legends that I have ever seen whose win rate went down after release. Almost always, players pick up the champion and get better at playing the champion faster than people get better at playing against the champion. Neeko, because all of her abilities just kind of work when you mash your face in the keyboard, right? You aim at them and press Q and E, and even pressing W is okay, and then R is pretty obvious as well. The basic idea is if you panic and just mash your keyboard, how effective is your champion? Neeko's at 70% or so. Neeko does pretty well just day one, just hitting your stuff. But dealing with the clones and dealing with her disguising, is a skill test. And in high elo, people have learned that skill test pretty well, and she's not too strong. In low elo, she's still bopping kids. She's very good in low rating, and so, moderate nerfs seem fine. And so here is the base damage nerf on Neeko Q. If you only hit the basic burst versus the second versus the third, the little 2 follow-ups. And these numbers are so close to the same that you've got the exact same percentage difference, 12 to 8 to 6 to 5 to 4% difference in damage. If you go down several more sort of decimals, you eventually find small differentiation, but this is basically the same number across the board. So, a middling 10 to 5% damage cut. Keep in mind the AP ratio doesn't go anywhere, so her late game is still the same, but a small nerf to if she's not doing too well. It's a bigger nerf to support Neeko than anything else. Support Neeko is not really her best role. Mid and top seem to be her best roles, so she's getting farm. Her ratios are still very, very good, and so she's got to now have a good game to have a good late game because she needs to rely on her ratios a bit more. Seems fine, reasonable. T-Mac getting 125 gold extra on the cost. I know there are several junglers like Rengar who are very sad about this. These champions aren't doing all that well. They needed T-Mac to clear the jungle. This is a bit unfortunate for them, and I feel bad for them that they are losing some power in their kit. That said, ultimately, you used to pay about 175 gold for the active on Tiamat. The amount of attack damage and health regen you got, you only paid 175 for the passive active. Now you're paying 300 gold for the passive active. That is still exceptionally efficient. Tiamat is an extremely, extremely efficient item, and rushing Tiamat was good on a lot of champions because, of course, that passive and that active were exceptionally good. Tiamat deserves to be at least this expensive, probably more. Typically, items that are this early on into the chain that aren't like a finished Maw of Malmortius or a finished Ravenous Hydra or a finished Morellonomicon or Luden's Echo, those are allowed to be efficient because you're questing for them. The goal is to finish those items, and that's where the satisfaction lies, is, I finished this item slot, I got a power spike. That's by design. That's how items work in this game. Tiamat at 1,200 gold being that efficient, probably not okay. And so I like, on a conceptual level, I think this is a good change. I feel bad, again, about champions like Rengar, who needed this item to get through the jungle, and I'm sorry. There are also some really, really abusive ones like Riven and Jax, who just efficiency on efficiency. So, would like to see compensation buffs for the hurt champions, but plenty of them could just take this nerf and move on. Excuse me. Next up is Zeke's conversion. Now, I have an interesting story about Zeke's convergence. During All-Stars, I believe, it was during All-Stars, some of the designers were talking with some of the pros, because a bunch of like the core gameplay, like Summoner's Rift designers, basically. I think that's like the new title now, is like their job is Summoner's Rift, because we have people that are working on things like Nexus splits and whatnot, and assuming that the Odyssey team is still around trying to do something else. Like, it seemed like that was successful, so I assuming they're still around doing stuff. There's now a Summoner's Rift team, and their job is maintaining Summoner's Rift the game. As opposed to like making new champions and whatnot, their job is Summoner's Rift. Okay, so they met up with some pros at All-Stars and said, hey, what kind of champions would you want to see added into pro play? Would you want to see pro-specific buffs for them? Why are we seeing tank support so much? One of the things that popped up was actually that Zeke's convergence is OP, and because it's really only good on tank supports, that was making tank supports played so much, and it was doing so much for them. Now, I agree that Zeke's was OP. Now, I was calling Ardent Sensor OP back in the day, and sure enough, we went to Ardent Sensor meta in 2017, and I thought Zeke's was OP as well. And we never really went to Zeke's meta, but then eventually we settled onto a tank meta where we bought Zeke's every game, or at least most games. So, not really surprising here. This item has always been stupid efficient, and this might be a change that in competitive, at least according to some pros, is going to make tank supports no longer mandatory, especially with, way up there, all those enchanter item buffs. Like, I love being in a world where you have defensive tanks, offensive tanks, enchanters, and mages played in support. I like playing all four of those kinds of champions. I actually really enjoy sort of like the breadth of what support does. It's my second favorite role. So yeah, making more things viable is a good thing, especially in pro. Especially because also your average solo queue player doesn't buy Zeke's because, I don't know, they're just not as good at the game. So this is a way to nerf tank supports in pro and not nerf them in solo queue. Seems positive. Next up, a quick buffs to outer turrets. They now have 40 armor and MR after the turret plating fall off. That is a straight 40% durability bump to outer turrets. I did not do a bunch of heavy math to whether or not this means that they are more durable than they ever were before. I like the idea of saying, well, now that turret platings have fallen, if, they were pushing you down and took your map control away, well, now you've got the chance to get those turrets back. I like the idea of, after the laning phase is over, those turrets being frail. But I understand players not really liking that, and the turrets just feeling too squishy. Like, there is a certain level of game pacing that matters, but also player expectations being met. And I think that's reasonable that players get to say, hey, I would like if my turrets didn't fall over so quickly, and that seems reasonable. In fact, I expect more game pacing changes like this to happen in 9.1. Because certainly, like, now is the time to start following up on game pacing. How fast are high elo games? Really fast. Really, really, really fast. So, do they have to change things like Dragon and Baron and turrets and minions and whatnot? And we're going to find out. And this is definitely going to be a metagame that's going to evolve over time. Because of how much minions change, they meet in different spots. Cannons meet sooner, so suddenly waves push back and don't push back in different places when they used to and didn't used to before, and things are different. There's going to be a lot of solving around how mid-game works now because the underlying minion mechanics have changed, and so the things that they do are different, and people were relying on certain game-basing things that aren't there anymore. And I really do hope that League still ends up being, a satisfying mid-game experience. Like, I really hope that these sort of preseason changes don't fail the game. But I also do think it's good that the game is down to like a 30-minute game time. That if they can make each phase matter and feel satisfying, said, yes, you're going to get a 12-minute laning phase instead of a 10-minute laning phase, and you're going to get your first item. Then you're going to get an 8-minute mid-game, and then you're going to get a 10-minute late game. And then if that doesn't end, then you can crest towards Uber endgame, instead of late game end game, where it's like, okay, you go towards item 5 and item 6, and like if those pacings line up well, that's a good thing. And I think that was the goal here. I think they're getting close, and I eagerly await the continued sort of pacing changes. Anyway, thanks for watching. You're all amazing, and I will see you next time.